Hello, I'm Patrick Brown, Mayor of Brampton. For this week's COVID-19 press briefing and media availability for the City of Brampton's efforts on COVID-19, I'm joined by Councillor Jeff Bowman, who is the co-chair of our Social Support Task Force and a representative on the Emergency Management Task Force. I'm also joined by Dr. Lawrence Lowe, who is the Medical Officer of Health for Peel Region, who's doing great work here in Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon. Dr. Lowe will provide some details about the COVID-19 situation, our challenges in the long-term care setting, and looking forward to where we may be going and opportunities there are for public health. But first, I'm going to provide an update on our enforcement of physical distancing and our great team of city bylaw officers. I can tell you in the last week, we've had 4,584 inspections. We have had 195 warnings issued and 30 charges laid. So we do take the time to warn residents that aren't following the physical distancing bylaws that are stressed to be so important from public health as one of our key tools to flatten the curve. And let me give you some examples of where we've had to lay charges. There was 5 house parties that resulted in 13 different charges. Now is not the time to be hosting a party at your house for friends. We need people to be keeping their distance. There was 2 gatherings on parking lots. Just because you can't hold a party at your home, it doesn't mean you can hold a party in a parking lot, and charges were laid in 2 instances for social gatherings on parking lots. We've had to issue 8 charges in the last week for people who continue to use our parks. Obviously, if one family feels that they can use the park, everyone is going to use the park. We've kept the trails open, but the parks, our playground equipment is not for public use at this point, while physical distancing is so important. And lastly, we've laid 8 charges for non-essential businesses that were operating. We really need to respect the provincial list of essential workers, and for the businesses that failed to comply, there was financial penalties. I want to also note today that City Hall is transforming in Brampton to be able to operate digitally. And let me give you an example. For planning, we've actually been able to receive 25 new development applications that we've processed and are examining digitally. On a building front, we're now doing second suite inspections electronically using technology like Zoom. For recreation, we now have virtual fitness, the seniors digital cafe, adventures and homes arts and crafts, all from your home computer. Our art scene, which is incredible in Brampton, the Festival of Literary Diversity, we're actually hosting online. We've got weekly concerts at the Rose Theatre that are broadcasted digitally for the community to enjoy. And starting May 5th, all city committees will be restarting, but digitally. And so with modern technology, there's no reason the City Hall can't operate on all cylinders in a manner that can include public participation, but having that public participation digitally as well. And so I'm pleased that we've been able to now officially transform all city services digitally for this new challenge of being able to operate and function as a city within the COVID-19 environment. Some updates locally that I want residents to know about. Brampton is very proud of our Cherry Blossom Festival. It's something that usually brings large crowds. I want to let the public know that this year is not a year where they're going to be permitted to gather. I know everyone likes to go down to Joyce Archdeacon Park and see the beautiful and iconic Cherry Blossom Festival, but if you do so, you could face fines from bylaw officers because we're not permitting crowds for our Cherry Blossom Festival. It's not something that's going to be permitted this year. So please know that we'll be sharing photos of our Cherry Blossom Festival, but it will be done so digitally. Garage sales. I want to give the public a warning about garage sales. When I think of garage sales, I think of my late grandmother, my maternal grandmother from Barrie, and she loved going to garage sales every single weekend in the spring. And I know many families love doing the same thing. But I want to warn the public, on the advice of public health, on the advice of our team here, emergency team at the City of Brampton, we're not going to be allowing garage sales. It's too much of a risk to have this virus spread, and so you're going to have to wait for your favorite garage sales once we get through this COVID-19 pandemic. So a warning to stay home. Garage sales are not considered an essential service. I also want to note that this week our task force operations have some interesting work ahead. We've got a seniors town hall. Any senior in Brampton can participate on this digital town hall. And we also have a youth Instagram live town hall where we're going to have mental health experts on the call to talk about how we can manage this pandemic together. The last thing I want to note before I introduce our medical officer of health is I want to thank the Premier and the Prime Minister last week for sending in the Canadian Forces to Grace Manor at Holland Christian Homes. Obviously, it's very challenging. The medical officer of health is going to speak about the challenge in long-term care settings. But to have that support at Holland Christian Homes, it does make a big difference. And on behalf of the City of Brampton, I want to thank the Canadian Forces for their support. Those 50 to 60 Canadian Forces personnel that came in, it makes a big difference and helps us stabilize what was a very dangerous situation. So on that note, I'm going to introduce our Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Lawrence Lowe, to give the City of Brampton and the general public an update on COVID-19 in Peel Region.
Thank you very much, Mayor Brown, and good morning. Regarding the COVID-19 pandemic in our community, as of yesterday at noon, we have had 2,358 cumulative confirmed and probable cases of COVID-19 detected in the region. 130 of those cases have required some form of hospitalization. 242 of those cases have recovered, and 89 tragically have passed away. In Brampton, we have seen 1,033 of those cases, 32 of whom have been hospitalized, 98 who have recovered, and 22 who have died. Specifically in the region and specific to senior settings, we have seen 426 cases amongst residents in long-term care and retirement homes, and also 40 resident deaths. In Brampton specifically, that includes 104 cases and 9 deaths in long-term care settings. Overall, we continue to see two parallel trends with the COVID-19 pandemic. We continue to detect new cases in the community. However, it appears that spread is slowing. That said, many of our new cases are institutional, arising in congregate settings. We're also starting to see and continue to see severity and volume in the hospitals and our intensive care units in our region. This makes the picture very clear. In the community, cautiously, things are starting to look up. Our progress is thanks to the extraordinary sacrifices of so many: our public health, healthcare, and essential services staff, and our first responders, our community's workers in grocery stores, pharmacies, transit, and other places where they can't and need to keep our community moving, and also ordinary businesses, families, and people who have stepped up and stayed home, practiced physical distancing, whether they're out for a walk or washing their hands if they've come back from the grocery store or the pharmacy. This is what has made the community trend start to look a little bit more optimistic. The trend is different in our senior and congregate settings, which has become our current priority focus at Peel Public Health. We sit at an integrated table together with healthcare, hospital, and long-term care agencies, and continue to lead an expanded response in this sector on key areas around staffing, personal protective equipment, testing, outbreak management, infection prevention and control, and virtual care. Among all these pieces, Peel Public Health continues to lead and direct the management of outbreaks at 22 institutions in the region and work with our partners to proactively test and prepare other homes across our community for the same. We have distributed nearly 4,000 swabs to test residents across the region in these settings in the past week and a half. It also, taken together, all means that our picture in Peel is reflective of what is seen in the Greater Toronto Area, which is very different from other parts of Ontario, and speaks to the need for us to not become complacent. While we continue to respond in our senior settings, we must remember that community transmission of COVID-19 still continues, even as physical distancing has slowed spread. Letting our guard down at this time would risk opening a flood and also compromise our efforts to control and arrest transmission in senior settings. Hence, at this moment, we must continue our current measures. We also recall that there are no winners in a pandemic. Grieve for those who have lost loved ones to COVID-19, and also stand with those whose lives have been upended. 6 weeks into this measure, it is natural for people to ask questions about where this goes. I want to highlight a few key concepts that have garnered attention in media in the recent days. Firstly, I want to share that Peel Public Health engages in contact tracing, just like any other public health agency in the world. It is fundamental to our work as public health practitioners. Since January, we have redeployed many staff to this work, isolating positive cases and aggressively tracking down and quarantining contacts. This work, in some part, is a reason why we were able to hold off the establishment of community transmission here in Canada and in Peel until about early March. Contact tracing has served us well to date. However, to support a gradual return to public life, we will need greater investment and resources to bolster our contact tracing efforts to ensure that we can deal with any uptake in cases and severity. Secondly, the ongoing search for a vaccine and questions around immunity remind us that this is fundamental to protecting people and slowing transmission. We continue to learn about immunity as it pertains to COVID-19. I want to remind that the severe outcomes that are seen, especially among the old and those with medical conditions, is often driven by our own immune systems reacting to a totally new threat. Our body's knowledge of other coronaviruses provides a bit of a residual immunity, which reduces severe outcomes. Over time, humanity has typically cleared seasonal coronavirus infections without severe outcomes. However, those seasonal coronaviruses cause common respiratory illnesses that also suggests that lasting herd immunity may be an elusive goal. The common cold is common for a reason. All of this means that any reopening must be done cautiously. Even something simple as reopening schools, for example, means opening the wider community and system that surrounds them. The pickups, the drop-offs, the school parent-teacher meetings, the supply chain, all the support staff. That would all renew interactions, which would in turn increase circulation of the virus. In reopening, therefore, we need more support to ramp up our valuable contact tracing work, and we also need to continue to rely on testing, both to detect and inform and isolate, but also, hopefully, to eventually help us track immunity. This all also means, for the moment, that we must stay the course, even if the weather is getting nice, even if FaceTime is way better than Facebook time. We must continue to stay safe by staying home and practicing physical distancing, but I want to reassure all of you, we will get there. Brighter days are much ahead. And so I encourage you to stay well, stay apart, and stay safe. And I'll pass it back to Mayor Brown.
Next up, we have Councillor Jeff Bowman, who is the city's representative on the Emergency Management Task Force and the co-chair of our Social Support Task Force. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you very much, Mayor Brown. I've brought along with me my homemade protective device, my mask. As co-chair of the Social Services Task Force, along with Councillor Santos, we're working to ensure that the city's most vulnerable have food, have all the necessities they need, and in a lot of cases, get any counseling that they need. Together with our 4 anchor food agencies, Regeneration, the Knights Table, CALSA Aid, and United Sikhs, we are working to ensure that food distribution in this city does not stop to those who need it. To date, we've delivered over 1,000 hot meals and food baskets to those who have signed up and to those who need it, as well as serving many, many, many others hot meals on a handout basis at the local distribution centers. We're still in need of donations, of course, for the anchor food agencies. We were on a call yesterday, and rather than sending food to them, they would much prefer, if you can, cash donations, because then they can buy the essentials that they really need. Through this pandemic, we've been working for about 5 weeks on this committee right now, and we've seen some absolutely marvelous things. We've had many, many companies in this city donate to the food anchors, and I'm just going to mention a couple of them. We've had the Mandarin, for instance, donated 5 skids, which included 6,000 takeout containers, which we've been using for the hot meals. We've got over 2 tons of peanut butter donated by a local company, Golden Boy Foods, 10 pallets of pasta from Etel Pasta, as well as takeout containers from Shepherd's Packaging, and a number of other very, very large and great donations, including our social agencies, Rotary, Kiwanis. They've come through with PPE as well as funding for some of the programs we've got. I've also want to thank all those people who are working. I know that the people who are the frontline workers, the hospital workers, the firemen, the emergency care and management people, we all recognize them, but there is a lot of people behind the scenes too we'd like to recognize, and that includes everybody from office workers who are still managing, the truck drivers, the shippers, receivers. They all need credit for what they're doing. I'd also like to say that we are taking care of those people who are homeless. We do recognize that there are over 30 encampment sites around the city of Brampton. We're providing counseling to those people. We're trying to get them into beds and homes where we can, and we are providing hot food and meals to them. So we do recognize there is an issue with the vulnerable and the homeless population that we're trying to work on. We are in this together. Let's all stay home if we don't have to go out, and we will get through this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bowman. That concludes our summary of the efforts in the last week, but I'd be happy to take any questions now. I see we have Graham from the Brampton Guardian.
Hey, Mayor Brown, how's it going? I have a couple of questions. You mentioned 8 businesses had been fined there. I'm just curious, what types of businesses are being sort of fined, and how much is the fine for a business staying?
Well, fortunately, we have Paul Morrison from our bylaw department here today, and he can come up and answer that question directly for you.
I can tell you that the businesses range from contractors that are out working on the street to contractors working in the homes to a couple of businesses that are non-essential retail businesses.
And sorry, what was the fine for that? Business, is it $880 like an individual, or is it a higher fine?
The fine is $750 plus the victim surcharge. It takes it $880. If we go by way of Part 1, if we go by way of a Part 3 summons, it's a court appearance, and the fine will be made decision by a justice of the peace.
One more question here. What has to happen? I guess this would be for Dr. Lowe. I mean, what does the region have to see, or I guess health officials have to see before even considering reopening? I mean, what are some of the trends that would have to happen before that becomes a consideration?
Thanks, Graham, for the question. As I described in the picture initially, we are tracking 2 things. We're looking at new cases, and we're also looking at severity, which is counted in terms of hospitalizations and deaths. And to a large extent, we're seeing a slowing of growth in new cases, at least in the community. Many of our new cases are being seen in senior settings and congregate living settings right now, and that means that we are still hoping for that picture to stabilize. And similarly, we do have people that are admitted to hospitals across the region that are in ICU and in hospital beds, and also we are seeing a trend of an uptick of deaths as well. So until we're starting to see those stabilize and flatten out and start to decrease, the hope is that we would be able to continue with the measures that are in place right now.
Okay, well, thank you, Graham.
City employees have been infected. Oh, yeah.
Sure, Graham, did you have a follow-up question, or does that cover it? Okay, Lucy from in Brampton is up next.
Hi there. So my question is, what are some of the preliminary steps that the mayor's working group will take to safely resume programs and services that have been impacted by COVID-19?
So the working group on reopening the city is chaired by Councillor Martin Medeiros, and he's been tasked with working with Peel Public Health, the Region of Peel, the City of Brampton's occupational health and safety team to look at, once we're advised from the province that the emergency has been listed, once public health has told us it's safe, what precautions should we be taking? Should there be temperature checks in recreation centers? Should there be gloves provided in the library? Should there be sanitizer provided at all city facilities? Should there be safety precautions taken at city parks? Those are all the questions that his working group is studying right now. He's going to give that final report to council, but I'd say we are premature. Certainly we're listening to the advice of Dr. Lowe and Dr. Tam in Ottawa to make sure that we don't rush this. The last thing we want is to have a second wave. You just saw what happened in Germany and Denmark, where they relaxed too quickly, and it's caused a setback. I'm a big believer that you need to listen the health officials and to science, not over picking thin dates in the middle of the, out of thin air by politicians.
Thank you very much.
Nida from the Pointer.
Municipalities recently, sorry, can you hear me?
We can.
All right, sorry. So the Federation of Canadian Municipalities recently released a report highlighting federal recommendations on the financial impact COVID-19 will have on municipalities. What are your thoughts on the numbers presented in the report?
So I was part of the Big City Canadian Mayors conference call. We had a number of them over a few weeks preparing that ask and that pitch. Obviously, they wanted to highlight municipalities that are facing more adversity to give a window into the challenges on municipal finances. And listen, I support the report. The efforts being led, particularly by Edmonton Mayor Don Iveson, I'm 100% behind. Municipalities can't run deficits. Provincial governments and federal governments can. And so when there's not support for some of the financial pressures that we're facing in cities, it's not just City Hall that's going to be challenged. It's the services that municipal governments provide. It's policing, it's firefighting, it's paramedics, it's waste management. It's that hockey rink or that recreation center that you want to have open. And so I think the provincial and federal governments get it. I've been told by Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland and by the Provincial Finance Minister Rod Phillips that there's going to be support on the way, that help is on the way, and I'm taking them at their word that municipalities are going to get some assistance, and I'm grateful that all my colleagues in the big city mayors have continued to advocate vigorously.
Can you please elaborate on the conversations you've had with the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister of Ontario? What does this financial assistance consist of?
So the situation is still very fluid. What the Minister of Finance, Rod Phillips, said is keep track of our expenses that are related to COVID-19. With the Deputy Prime Minister, we've had talks in particular about maintaining integral services. I'll give you an example of a conversation I had with her was on transit operations. We depend on transit operations as a national service. You look at Brampton, where the food processing sector, medical laboratories are serviced by public transit. We can't shut down public transit. It would damage our national security to do so, food security, health security. And so, she was very cognizant of the fact that we're going to need some assistance. And, there's no numbers on the table yet, but I'm encouraged by the collaborative tone that I'm hearing from both the provincial and federal governments. And the reason I reference transit is we lose money on transit every single day because we're not collecting fare right now. And we're doing that to protect our transit operators. Next up, we have Don McLeod from Brampton Focused. Don, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, just a quick follow-up on what was in regards to the tax increase. Mississauga stated their tax increase would be a one-time 17%. Has the city of Brampton calculated what the increase would be for Bramptonians?
So if you look at the cities presenting how this has damaged their budget, the range tends to be from 4 to 15%, where Mississauga's assessment is they're more in the 15% range. Brampton's assessment has been more on the lower end of the scale, somewhere between 4 and 7%. So I'm, my message to the public is, I'm going to do everything possible to make sure we don't have a tax increase. I know this year has been tough enough. I know that the challenges on every home have been difficult, and I certainly would not be looking for or supporting a tax increase.
Okay, great. Brampton Civic is seeing a lower than normal volume at the ER during COVID outbreak. Why do you think that is? And do you think that will have consequences for funding for another full hospital in Brampton in the future?
So as you know, I've had a number of conversations with the Premier about the need for an additional hospital. He's told me that he's going to support a new hospital for the city. He understands the need. I don't think anyone would treat these COVID-19 weeks as typical. And so for any forecasting they do on medical needs, it wouldn't just be visits would not be down just in Brampton; they'd be down across the board. And so I would assume the province would have a fair understanding of that.
Okay, just a question.
Yes? Oh, we've lost. Okay, we'll go to Haley Cooper from News Talk 1010.
Hi, Mayor Brown. We were looking for some more details on these 5 house parties that you just described. Were they family members that were having a large family gathering of maybe 12 people, or were they 20-somethings having a rager? What can you tell us about these house parties?
So I can tell you there was 5 different parties. It resulted in 13 charges being laid. I'm going to ask our Paul Morrison from our bylaw department to speak specifically to the nature of the parties, if they were young people or they were keg parties, what the nature of them were.
I can tell you the parties were relatively smaller in nature, probably 8 to 12 people. Mostly friends were at these parties. There were a couple where there were family gatherings. I believe one was a birthday celebration, but relatively small. Backyard parties for 1 or 2 of the events, and the rest were inside the house.
And my follow-up question, how did you learn of these parties? Was it neighbors that called them in, or was it simply patrols and the police saw these gatherings?
I can tell you in all of these incidents, they were called in by complainants within the city. Could be neighbors, could be somebody passing by, but they were called to us.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Haley. We have Tabish from Red FM.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Morning.
Mr. Mayor, earlier this month you suggested about adding the foreign-trained doctors in the health system. So did you speak to the Premier or Health Minister after that, if there is any more development on this front?
So we have advocated to both the Premier and the Minister of Health, Christine Elliott, about this. They have said they're creating a health website that will take resumes in for all skills that are available. They said physicians would be included in that. We haven't got an update on how many have been approved to work within the hospital setting. My sense is it hasn't happened yet, but we're monitoring it closely, and we'll continue to advocate to the Premier that this is something that we really believe in Brampton. We can't waste talent on the sidelines when they could be saving lives.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I know we lost Brampton Focus before. Is it possible to get them back for their supplementary, or are they gone now? Okay. Well, thank you so much for this week's edition of the Brampton COVID-19 update.